Hello everyone, welcome and thank you for tuning in this afternoon. Our topic for today is redefining growth in the 21st century. We all know we need urgent action to address the climate crisis. Our planet is collapsing under the burden of resource-intensive growth in the richer countries and also under population growth, especially in Asia and Africa. With my guest today, I want to discuss solutions, ideas, and visions on how to transform global systems and to accelerate systemic change for a sustainable and prosperous world. As always, you can post your questions on the right side of your screen, and I will pick them up and pass them on to our guest after the talk. With that, let's welcome today's guest, Martin Stuchtey. Professor Dr. Martin Stuchtey is the co-founder and managing partner of SYSTEMIQ. SYSTEMIQ is a systems change company that partners with business, finance, policymakers, and civil society to make economic systems more sustainable, especially focusing on driving systems change in 3 areas: energy, clean energy, circular material solutions, and sustainable land use. By addressing market failures in these areas, SYSTEMIQ aims to unlock economic opportunities that benefit business, society, and environment. Prior to founding SYSTEMIQ, Martin worked 20 years at McKinsey, where he also initiated the McKinsey sustainability practice, working with numerous corporate, government, and social sector clients on the challenges of climate change, water scarcity, ocean degradation, and resource depletion. And last but not least, he is also a professor for resource strategy and management at Innsbruck University in Austria. Welcome, Martin.
Welcome, Miki.
So I'm very excited to have you as my guest today and discuss your visions and your approach with SYSTEMIQ in tackling global challenges. So our systems have long been blind to the ecological limits of growth, and also because our resources seemed infinite. And your company aims to transform global systems to catalyze good disruptions in economic systems, and especially to drive a shift from the product economy to a so-called performance economy. Can you explain what you mean by a performance economy?
Well, first of all, the performance economy is not the attempt to make us all even higher performing. So I've left that part of my life behind me. The performance economy is a very important concept. If you think about it, we don't need cars, we need mobility. We don't need fridges, we need fresh food. We don't need iPhones, smartphones for that purpose. We need connectivity. We don't need tires, we just need the movement that comes out of them. So what we're really buying is the performance. And we have all grown up ever since the early days of our early economies, and then ever since the Industrial Revolution in a world where we sell products. You could, in fact, imagine and visualize a world in which we just buy the performance. That has a number of interesting side effects, which are only now coming through in the 21st century. Because it allows you to decouple our growth from resource use. And that's a big deal, because resource consumption is at the heart of the problems that we are currently facing. Not just climate change, although it's fair to say that 50% of climate change is in fact correlated with our excessive use of resources. Biodiversity as well. You can make the point that 90% of biodiversity loss is in fact also related to resource consumption, but also other things like pandemics that we're facing now. That has to do with how deeply we actually encroach onto a habitat in search of resources. So first of all, it allows us to decouple ourselves from resources. If you don't buy the product, if you buy the service, that allows you to use every product that we are creating much more productively than in the current form, where a car, for example, is parked 92% of the time. But there's also some other advantages that you get with it. Selling things in the 21st century is just a very old-fashioned thing to do. In the age of information availability, you want to be close to your customers, you want to understand their demand, their requirements, their usage patterns, and you do that if you have a different contract with them than just selling something and losing them out of sight. And then lastly, it's the only way to take advantage of the ever-improving products that we are able to produce. If you are producing an electric car that has something like 1 million kilometers of lifetime in it, just selling it on day one is an increasingly weak proposition. And that's why the concept of a performance economy, the concept of moving from products to product service systems, and the concept of overall servitizing our economies is a very, very important one if we want to believe that resource decoupling is possible.
Okay. So can you tell me maybe a little bit more on what that would mean for example, a car maker or an automotive company?
Well, in the end, we want mobility, and the fact that sort of some ride-sharing mechanisms or also e-hailing mechanisms or others sort of are in fact quite attractive to us has to do with the fact that in congested cities of the future, all we care about is how we are mobile, how we have a high service, high reliability, high accessibility mobility service. And for a car company has been serving that demand, that for performance in the past by selling cars. In the future, you could think about a world in which we are actually selling mobility to our customers. And automotive producers have many ways to do that. So they can actually look at the fleet of cars that they produce as something that, well, first of all, they can look at it as something that you actually take advantage of, not just through one round of usage, but where actually sort of you are offering to take it back. By the way, there are many products where the producers thrive from take-back commitments. You could go a step further and you could actually say that we keep the car. They're too precious to sell because they're so good that we want to take advantage of their longevity, of the sustained premium message and status that it carries. And that's why we are giving it to you for use in some kind of contractual agreement, but in the end, we are taking it back. That would create clearly proximity to the customer, a better understanding of what the customer really wants. It would allow them also to take part in the secondary and tertiary markets, where an OEM is just not present right now, and they are a substantial part of the car market. And it would allow them basically to have all the resources that they will need forever on their balance sheet already. So you don't have to open the newspaper on a Tuesday morning and see what the commodity markets are doing. There have been moments where the surge in commodity markets sort of added $1 billion or $2 billion of extra cost to an automotive producer. Now you live in a world where essentially all of that sits within your own asset base, with many resilience advantages that come through that. And the word resilience is one that we are starting to learn, everyone. And if we didn't know it prior to COVID-19, we now know the value of resilient systems. And so this is not just abstract economic decoupling, this is also very concrete business decoupling, because you keep control of the assets that you actually need to deliver your service.
So I can see that there are a few examples or company examples where they're really starting to think about that shift, but I think many companies are still having trouble on kind of contributing to that shift or really changing their business models. What do you think is needed to really achieve a paradigm shift?
I think we see a couple of examples of companies who do that very successfully. Caterpillar, for example, they started selling a lot of their equipment and they take it back, and so they have very successful remanufacturing operations. If you want to buy a jet engine, then you would typically not buy that as a product. You would buy that as a power by the hour agreement. If you buy a tire from many of the more progressive and potentially also successful companies, you don't buy a tire, you buy kilometers. And that, on the one hand, that just seems like a trifle, like a contractual arrangement. On the other hand, it's substantial. It's a real paradigm shift, to use your language, because it changes the engineering brief. Because all of a sudden, the engineering brief is, don't design a tire that breaks after 100,000 kilometers. The engineering brief is, design a tire that lasts forever. But please also design a tire where, given that we have a long-term liability, that we keep it, can you please design it in such a way when it comes back that it's just that it has value, and that it's not just seen as an environmental liability because of all the toxins that we have designed into it on day one. And all of a sudden, sort of something very dramatic happens. So you are shifting with your interest as a producer to the same side of the table where the consumers and society and the environment sits. And once you are incentive aligned through this shift from a product to a performance economy and through servitizing, you don't need sustainability reports anymore, because you don't have to tell anyone that you, despite trying to be profitable, that you do sustainability. All of a sudden, everyone would believe you that driving resource productivity is at the heart of your business model. So if you would be very imprudent, not to say insane, if you weren't optimizing for low environmental impact and high resource productivity. So that's the trick, and that's why we think it's a very important part of the equation.
Okay. What do you think, or what role do you think does Europe play in making this shift and also making or driving this transformation towards a performance economy, especially now in the reconstruction and rebuilding the economy after the Corona crisis?
Well, first of all, we don't have much reason to be happy with how the European economy is currently faring versus some of our international competitors. Sort of, I don't get much delight out of the fact that that Tesla essentially beats the market cap of most of the German OEMs. Sort of, I like the Tesla idea and the technology. I don't like the idea that they beat us on market cap. I don't like the idea that one of the large US IT companies has a market cap that equals the entire DAX, and I don't like the fact that that we are entering real estate companies sort of into the DAX rather than some fast growth technology companies. So we have a reason to take that question that you are asking super serious, and we have a reason to be a bit discontent. But at the same time, I think we also have a reason to be really optimistic. So I'm confessing pro-European, and I'm also a confessing supporter of the European Green Deal. We've always said we need to have a compass, we need to have a vision that reignites us for Europe. And for those who have actually read the December document of the European Green Deal, it comes as close as anything can to providing such a vision. It's essentially saying that we as Europe need to be climate neutral in 2050. And it's using sort of, by the way, it's using very romantic language, even by saying that we need to return to live in harmony with nature and reconciliate our lifestyle with planetary boundaries. But it doesn't say, okay, and that's why we have to create a brutal environmental overlay over everything else we do. It essentially says, look, that's our starting point for our renewal, for our economic renewal, because that's the source of innovativeness and competitiveness in the world, our ability to deliver those new solutions, systems, technologies. But then it also goes into politics, so as makes it the foundation of our political agenda, and said that also needs to drive the change towards a just transition, because we have a lot to repair when it comes to the state of our societies. And ever since 2015 and 16, we have seen what it feels like to live in societies that are increasingly torn apart and susceptible to populist attraction. In a way, it actually takes it as a starting point for reigniting or rejuvenating the European economy. And I think that's very strong. If you and then it's a very complete set of papers, 11 papers that goes all the way from the climate law, the mobility transition, the agricultural transition, the infrastructure transition, the energy transition, towards biodiversity, towards how we have to reorganize our financial markets. And it's trying as good as you can in a few months, and in a very complex system with many interests like Europe. It really sort of provides the full blueprint, and I think it deserves our support. And I think it's a real beacon of light and hope, versus the other approaches that we see to be economically relevant and meaningful. And so I think there's really something forming like the European way, and it's taking this core capability into the heart. It needs to be those countries, those economies will be successful in the future that have one ability, and the ability is to create lots of shared prosperity with as little planetary inputs as possible. So that's the new definition of productivity. And if we as Europe, with all the pain that it takes to get there and to learn that new trick, if we are able to do that, that gives us back what we had in the past, which is a competitive proposition in the world. And I find that very fascinating and very conclusive at the same time.
Do you think that this vision or plan that you just talked about could also help Europe to gain some foothold in the innovation race, and so that we maybe produce the next Tesla and don't have a real estate company in the DAX, or don't take a real estate company in the DAX, but maybe also a very promising tech company? So is this maybe the chance for Europe as well in regards to innovation?
Yeah, look, I mean, we all dream of that. I mean, how nice, and by the way, this is not against other big trading blocks. This is about just waking up the European potential. I mean, we would all dream that there would be a green mobility unicorn in Europe. We would all dream that there would be a hydrogen unicorn. We would dream that there would be a sort of a next generation green construction company unicorn in Europe. That there would be that we would actually own the high ground on cultured or synthetic meat or plant-based meats, and new forms of agriculture, new forms of precision farming, new forms of renewable energy generation, new way of using our marine wealth through seaweed or through aquaculture. I wish there was a unicorn for all of those, particularly at the place where these ideas meet high tech and digital. Currently, I don't know. What I do see is that we are losing a lot of high ground in established industries. I see that we are losing out on automotive. I see that we are losing out to chemical players who just in other regions of the world find it easier to compete on lower cost inputs. I see how we already have lost a lot of ground on electronics, and let alone textiles and also some of those industries. Where could that impetus come from for us actually to be relevant again? And I think it can actually come if we have a consistent, long-term, plannable, trusted environment and context in which entrepreneurs know what they are investing against and what's coming towards them in the long term. And that's why it's so important to have that European Green Deal really as an all-encompassing and jointly supported vision. Then I think that's the corner of the economy where that where that innovativeness actually could come back from.
Okay. So you see, or SYSTEMIQ does a lot of work around the principle of circular economy or materials, meaning decoupling economic activity from the consumption of finite resources, and also designing waste out of the system. And I'm wondering, what kind of project or initiative is SYSTEMIQ currently working on to advance this principle?
We have quite a number of projects right now. I think it's something like 50, which is not that much yet. We only started ourselves 4 years ago. I have to say up front that we are a slightly odd company because the reason why we exist, we have been founded ourselves for no other reason than to accelerate the attainment of the Paris Climate Agreement and the Sustainable Development Goals. And we want to show that as a company, you can be part of that. You don't automatically have to work against our societal interests. You can, in fact, thrive as a company within that framework. So that's our big experiment right now. So however incomplete it is. We work on the projects that we work on are neither consulting nor investment. They are nor project development. They are in fact the attempt to really take a full systems perspective. So whatever we do at SYSTEMIQ, we apply our TOR, theory of change, or TOC, theory of change. So where we are asking ourselves, can we really make a clear case that change is needed and that there's a better system available? Can we really explain in hard economics, believable numbers, that single-use plastic that has to be recreated every single time, and where more than 30% ends up in the environment, that there is a better, first of all, that is an issue, and secondly, that there's a better alternative, a more circular alternative available. So first of all, you have to be able to make the case. Then you have to be able to mobilize all the actors. And in plastic, for example, sort of once we've made the case, sort of we by saying sort of one of our calculations some years back has been that in 2020, which is now, we already have 3 kilograms of fish to 1 kilogram of plastic in the ocean, and it will be parity in 2040, and created those numbers in order to mobilize. And then sort of once you have created those numbers, then you need to ensure that actors start moving. Sort of we do that in the plastic space, we do that in the hydrogen space, we do it in the terrestrial carbon space. A lot of our work is taking place in Indonesia and in Brazil, where rainforest and deforestation is a huge issue, or where peatland burning is a huge issue, where we are trying to establish market mechanisms that show that there's a lot of value that sits in a standing forest. And now sort of there's increasingly a community of industries, of consumer goods companies around it that actually starts to explore the economic value that does not just come from carbon, but that also that is associated with standing forests, but also with the products that you actually can, the sustainable products that can come from those forests. And then the third thing that you have to do is you have to show it's possible. And and that's why sort of we don't want just to be a think tank or a consultancy or an advisor. We also invest our money and our investors' money to demonstrate what those missing links, what those market innovating companies could look like, and co-creating those solutions. So there's a number of them. There's one company we created which tries to show that natural gas, which everyone tells a bridge technology until we have renewables, actually comes with a big problem, because a lot of methane is lost at the borehole, and so in the end it's worse for the climate than sometimes coal. But there is an economic way to address that, and we have started a company called Capteria that does that. Or we have started a fairly large initiative, if you want, a project in Indonesia, where we are demonstrating that you can actually create zero waste communities, so where no plastic is entering the sea anymore. So we went to the ground zero of plastic pollution, those cities in Eastern Java, where you actually have 80 centimeters, a meter of solid plastic on all the shores, and where you have children who has within their lifetime never seen the sand underneath the plastic, where we are trying to demonstrate that you can actually, if you do it well and efficiently, that you actually can collect the material and return it into recycling channels. And so we think that sort of that system change is about doing all of those, creating a burning platform and a case, mobilizing the stakeholder building coalitions, generating pioneers, but then also demonstrating that those solutions could look like in such a way that large-scale capital starts to turn an eye at it, because the real objective that we decided we want to work on at SYSTEMIQ is making those new systems investable, because currently too much of the capital sits in the old risky stuff, and too little actually moves into the new and, as we think, exciting stuff.
To follow on, why do you think is that? And do you think that also capital and venture capitalists, investors are slowly kind of rethinking in what kind of businesses they invest, that they also change or open to changing the VC logic of generating triple returns in a time frame of 10 years? Do you think that is changing? And a second question, what is needed to also accelerate that change around investing?
A lot needs to happen. I mean, this is a very entrenched and complex system. I think it starts with opening our eyes. I don't think that we need to have the benign or the selfless investor. If we were reliant on those, then I think my optimism would shrink. I think just look at the big picture. We need just open our eyes to the big picture. If it's true what climatists are telling us, we need then first of all, they're telling us we want to live in a 1.5 degrees world, not in a 2 degrees world, let alone more degrees, simply because on the way between 1.5 and 2 degrees, many things that are precious to us get lost: coral reefs, many habitats. So if we want to go out for 1.5 degrees, that means that we have to apply the new carbon law, which means that from now until 2050, decade after decade after decade, every decade we have to cut our CO2 emissions by half. That is unprecedented. That is essentially, that means that we need to increase our productivity, our carbon productivity, 10% every year until 2050. Unprecedented. We have never done that. That requires such a massively different economy, circular, regenerative, low carbon, that everything that we are invested in right now is essentially a stranded asset. And we start to understand what a stranded asset feels like. Those who had their family money in some of the European utilities found out that you can actually see companies that don't have good answers actually go down in value significantly. And and you can tell the same story of stranded assets. You could, of course, tell for other industries, sort of automotive industry, packaged good industry, that we don't have to if they are smart and if they react and if they rethink business models and if they rethink their carbon footprint. But if not, then it ends up as a stranded asset. And stranded asset is poison for the long-term investor. And that's why all of a sudden we see things happening that we wouldn't have thought possible in the past. Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock, actually saying every investment decision we will make and you should make is linked to whether or not that fits into the Paris corridor. So I think we start to live in a world where the markets actually see that it's a bad idea to be invested in things that are not compatible with our universal climate strategy. The problem is much of that happens, of course, far too slowly. That's why we need to be very smart in which we are accelerating that. And I think what some things that the European Union does in the way it defines a taxonomy for sustainable investment is a good idea. The way in which many investors are actually trying to partner up with public sector or multilateral sources of funding and blend them then into a much better mix with lower costs of capital is a smart way. Ways in which venture capital is actually matched by public sources, the way we have it in Bayern, is a good idea. I mean, there are many, many instruments that need to come together. By the way, reducing the capital risk for investors by providing a world-class knowledge environment in the way UnternehmerTUM does it is also a way in which you are implicitly reducing the capital costs for innovation and those innovations that we need for the sustainable transition.
So talking about UnternehmerTUM, our mission is to foster the next generation of entrepreneurs and to grow the startup ecosystem and ultimately also to contribute to badly needed innovations that are necessary in Europe and globally, generally. But looking at what you said also before, that the US has brought up so many giants such as Amazon, Facebook, Tesla, Google, and then on the other hand, looking at the German DAX, it seems that we're losing the innovation race on many fronts, or that really a big step behind it. What can we do better as an entrepreneurship center? What would you expect, or what would you wish for?
So first of all, who am I to tell you? I mean, UnternehmerTUM is very successful, so we are all happy and proud to have it in Munich. I think just creating the bridge to this very conversation, first of all, I think it will be very important actually to look at all those changes that we talked about that we want to see happening as a huge opportunity. So we think that by developing serving the new demands that come with the Sustainable Development Goals. So we think that is a 12 trillion market in the end. So the SDG and sustainability-driven markets, we believe, actually are going to outgrow global GDP by 2 or 3x over time. So first of all, we have to be aware this is not just a problem. First and foremost, this is something that really sort of is a very interesting market. And then actually also to look into them, we have created an analysis where we, I mean, everyone splits a cake differently, sort of where we identified 60 really high impact new markets, investment opportunities that sit within the SDGs, affordable housing, alternative protein sources, stuff like that. And so really look at that and said, look, are we, with our technology, with our skills, are we delivering into those different growth markets? If it's not for the moral imperative, it's for the growth opportunity. Then I think a second thing that one could consider to do more of is to work along many different levels in a more integrated fashion. First of all, to be even more integrated in the way you work between startups and large corporates, because a lot of the European German innovation power, of course, sits there. And I think we are starting to find in an ideal blend of how those two work together, but I think there's still more opportunity. I think then also be more integrated in the way you look at new sources of capital. Don't just look for the VCs. We love them, but they don't, and they have deployable funds, but they won't be enough for the big, some of those big changes that we need. And that's why blending capital is also a good idea. Bavaria has a bit of a tradition of that. I think we can do much more of actually pulling concessional capital into the innovation space. I think there's also a way to be more integrated in the way you think about digital and analog. Sort of, it shouldn't be that Germany stands for good old engineering, and then someone else sort of puts delivers the digital overlay. I think Industry 4.0 is a very, very important theme, and it needs to be our strengths of how we are actually digitally enabling systems. And then finally, perhaps also, if I think about it, also more integrated in the way you think between national OECD markets and the global south. I think a lot of the growth and also a lot of the SDG or sustainability related opportunities are actually coming from the global south, and actually keeping an eye on those international markets early on and helping them actually to reach into those markets, Indonesia, Philippines, Brazil, India. I think is important because if you think, for example, what solutions are needed in the city of the future, and if you just look at Munich and Darmstadt, you might lose track of some of the bigger trends and of the more disruptive developments and of the more fast-growing markets. If you were looking at Dhaka and in Shenzhen or New Delhi for that purpose in the first place. Okay,
well, very interesting. Thank you for sharing your perspective and your work also with me. We're already at the end of my questions, and I see that there have been a lot of questions coming in from our viewers. So let's look at the first question. Which industries do you think will be the most important to move towards the performance economy?
I think in the past, the performance economy was something that was very much at home in the B2B industry. So if you wanted to buy heavy industrial machinery, it was more likely that they came to you and trying to sell it to you, but trying to lease it to you or trying to do a service contract with you. And I talked about jet engines. I think more and more of that needs to come to the consumer markets, because that's of course where a lot of the resources end up, and that's also, as I think, where a lot of the benefit, the customer value can be created through those models. We started seeing it a bit in automotive and in car sharing. We saw it a bit in accommodation and Uber and Airbnb. We have to, and I need to say that, of course, to think through how sort of what are the drivers and the barriers that we didn't think of until 6 months ago that come with pandemic risks are actually doing to the sharing and to the performance economy. I happen to think that there are some elements that slow it down, which are evident. Sort of you don't want to have shared transport to the same extent during a pandemic. But at the same time, there are also drivers that actually make the performance economy even more interesting in such a time. But at least I think we all have to confess that there's a bit of rethinking needed here now, because no one of us actually was expecting what's happening to us right now, and it's then morphing into all the way. Some of the my dress code is in fact sort of is part of I buy that on a flat fee. So I have for example, I have a subscription for denim pants, which I'm getting sent and which I'm returning. So it's returned back into a product where essentially sort of I am not buying trousers, I'm buying sort of the entitlement to wear one. And again, you could call it a performance economy. And I think a lot of that happens. And just to reiterate the point, sort of, if you don't believe in boring resources and boring climate change, if you believe in data, and if you believe in data science and into new ways of organizing the customer interface, that's just a much more sort of my flat fee subscription provider for my garments. They have a more interesting dialogue with me as a customer, as a user, than any of the shopping malls that has ever seen me to buy a pair of trousers. So I think it's a complete uplift in the way you can actually create customer intimacy.
Okay. So another viewer, Thomas, is asking, where do you personally believe the biggest impact can be made towards the performance economy? In politics, academia, nonprofit, or the for-profit sector?
I think it's a for-profit sector simply because it pays. So I mean, there are many things where the for-profits, so where we have to say, government, can you please fix it? So can you please give us a carbon price? Can you please give us sort of some regulation that creates a level playing field that makes sure that the responsible players don't look bad? There are many things where NGOs need to get active and nudge us a bit. But this is really something where we are quite confident that we have enough caseload and evidence today that it can be a fairly interesting model. Of course, as always, it could help if we have a couple of political guidelines that make this easier. For example, in a world with eco-design standards, you would more easily flip into a model where you're getting your very valuable material back per contract. For example, in a world where you have a unified extended producer responsibility, and you know that in the end, sort of, you need to clean up, as we do for plastic with the Grüner Punkt in Deutschland, for example, then it's easier sort of to nudge into such a performance model where you say, look, rather than paying a lot of money for entering single-use plastic into the market, why shouldn't I save that and just provide you with packaging service? Sort of, you have this one clean bottle that you get every time, and you use it over and over again. I'm making sure that whatever your shampoo or your drink, always return in a reusable bottle. And so, in a way, sort of not the packaging becomes the not the single-use plastic is the product, but sort of the packaging becomes the performance. So I think there's many parts of the economy where you could actually think that through. Regulation, level playing field, and smart rules always help, but this is something that where we see sort of immediate rewards today.
Okay. Alex is asking, how do we create a just transition for the generally lower income jobs that might be at risk when we shift away from cheap resource extraction?
This is it's a very good question, because can we afford to tackle climate change? And even if you don't go into the language that we can't afford not to because of all the economic consequences, a system where you are providing performance over products and where you're providing circularity over linearity is just cheaper, and it's more social. You can we've showed it for 3 sectors across Europe, for mobility, for the food sector, for the housing sector. If you really move to models where you're not selling, but where you have performance contracts and where the materials are designed in such a way that they can be recovered and recycled, and in the best case refurbished or reused, that creates a system that's better for the consumer. So this is overall, we thought that by 2030 you can actually provide those 3 services, to use our new language now, which is being moved, being housed, being fed, which is a big part of our life, so that we could provide them at 25% less if we did it in a more circular way. So that's a highly social, highly just approach. The fact that currently as a family you have to get yourself a very expensive primary car and in order to be mobile, and then at the same time you can only use it 10% or 8% of the time, because then in a way that's not a very affordable way of making sure people are moved. So I think that very much sits at the heart of the circular economy idea, that it could be cheaper. It's only more expensive if you don't link it with this idea of getting materials back and benefiting from take back. If you were to if you have a very, very costly biodegradable piece of packaging, that could be that it's more costly and we have to pay and we are jointly paying a price for it. But if you put it in a circular system, if you take it back, then I think things start getting more affordable. That's the one thing. The other thing is that if we subject ourselves to a couple of rules that make it easier to achieve the Paris Climate Agreement, that doesn't mean that we are splitting society. Switzerland has a carbon tax, which is in fact progressive, so it's not degressive. So everyone you have to pay on the carbon that you use, on the emissions, and then the whole pot of money is paid back at the end of the year per capita. And so basically everyone gets the same so on the many Swiss francs. And those who have been using a lot of CO2 on the way are then in fact pay extra, and those who have been using very little CO2, they in fact have a benefit. And as it happens, rich people are more emitting than poor people. And so, in other words, I think there are ways to create this justice. It's very important. We can't afford gilets jaunes. We can't afford a discussion in Europe or anywhere where we are saying that this whole green movement, the whole climate agenda, is on the back of vulnerable segments of society. So that's just ill-designed policy.
We have a lot more questions, but I think we're actually out of time and have to end the talk for today. So if you have more questions, feel free to go to the website of SYSTEMIQ and also to find out more on what they're working on and what they're doing. Also, if you want to know more about what UnternehmerTUM is doing towards the circular economy topic, check out the new report of our consultancy, UnternehmerTUM Business Creators. check out what Tech Founders is doing, how to also initiate and foster startup corporate collaborations, and also, of course, our new Impact Accelerator Respond that we just launched for the BMW Foundation. It's been a great pleasure talking to you, Martin. I'm sorry we already have to stop. It's been a very seemingly short talk because we have so much to talk about. So thank you very much for your time. And,
thank you, Miki.
And next week we have prepared a slightly different format for you. So Johannes von Borries, the partner of UnternehmerTUM Venture Capital Partners, will talk about the next unicorn. No, we'll talk about that the next unicorn wave will be in B2B tech. So be prepared for that talk next Tuesday at 4 p.m. And with that, have a nice afternoon. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next week.